and welcome to the second ever episode of Homescreen by 11FS. If you didn't catch the first episode, the program that we're doing now is really all about giving you guys a bit of an insight into the industry. So we've been in a situation where we've built out a really interesting product that Jim and the team have taken to market, but it's all behind one of those pesky paywalls. And what we want to do is try and bring some of those insights to you guys and actually deliver upon that, showing you what's happening out there in the industry. If you didn't catch the first episode, what did we talk about last week, Jim?
Last week was onboarding with Monzo, so how the fintechs are doing really cool digital first onboarding and signing up tons and tons of customers.
And it went super well because we're back for the second one. So like if it didn't go well, we would have never talked about this again. But on the basis that loads of you out there had some really, really great feedback, really good comments. If you haven't caught that one, head to the 11FS YouTube channel or search for me, David Breer, on Twitter, and you can find it over on Periscope. So this week we're going to be sort of continuing the theme, Jim.
Yeah, for sure.
And what are we going to be talking about?
So this week we're going to take a sort of a three-pronged approach of savings functionality. So there's as far as we know, three kind of really good examples of best practice in this space, and we want to kind of dive into those and check them out in a bit more detail.
Cool. And who are they?
So we're going to start off by looking at Bunq, the Dutch fintech. We're going to talk. It certainly is, and then you can talk a little bit about like the way that their internal services are working. So how they're kind of managing their savings functions in-house. Then we're going to take a look at Qapital, which is an American fintech who are kind of really integrating some nice, smart third-party solutions. And then we're going to take a look at Plum, the British fintech we've got here, who are kind of taking the algorithmic behavioral approach to savings. Cool. So probably would be quite useful to talk a little bit about context first. Mm-hmm. So saying what's going on out there in the market and kind of how people are approaching it. So at the minute, it sort of starts with two approaches. There is the savings bot approach, think Plum, think Chip. And then there is the savings pot approach, which is these sort of larger fintech companies. We've got Bunq being one example of them, the fintechs here in the UK. And what they're doing is moving money between sort of the main account and a pot and allowing for that money to deposited kind of in sort of simple ways. So there was a really interesting tweet some of you may have seen yesterday from, was it yesterday? It might have been, Simon VC, friend of the show, who said that 7 million was saved per month from the users. Damn. On from cash roundups alone in pots, wow. Which is absolutely amazing.
And that's Simon Van Scalina from Monzo, so that's £7 million a month is being saved into pots. Yeah. Amazing.
Check out that tweet. And then, so kind of, we can see how sort of these sort of tasks of making savings easier is kind of being sort of moved into the space of behavior and how sort of small changes to your sort of habits can help with these savings. So we've got two, as we mentioned before, two approaches, one being the bot approach and one being sort of around pots. And it's kind of nice to see how the smarter assistants are able to analyze these bigger chunks of money, and then you've got these pots that are dealing with typically smaller stuff, rounding up change and all that kind of stuff.
And the fintechs seem to be reasonably preoccupied with not calling savings accounts, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
So we've got pots and
vaults and goals and all this kind of stuff. It's absolutely. I think they're trying to get away from the idea of having like two accounts and just maybe having these as like smaller sub accounts. So a makeup of your larger account.
Okay.
So I guess we can sort of understand these three journeys and see how these methods are kind of being introduced to introduce like a best class savings type function. So I guess the first thing we can talk about is the internal services model from Bunq. So this is, as you'll see here, we're able to open up a different savings account and a savings goal. We enter the name of the goal here, and then we'll enter what the amount is. Clicking confirm, we've got our goal created and we can enable autosave. Sorry, this is moving a little quickly. But then we can see this goal we've set up, and you can see all of the different sorts of settings that we've got available to us. So loads and loads of detailed settings. So that's kind of what Bunq are offering at the minute. It's sort of mainly internal. And it's kind of a really good example of savings pots being used and how the users are able to sort of manage those really detailed management of those functions.
Well, and I guess it's sensible. They're trying to create some emotional attachment to these goals, right? So being in a situation where they're giving it a name, you're having some attachment to it. I know some of these players are allowing specifically to do pictures. I think there was some quite funny ones of the ones that I think Monzo was doing. I think there was a Brexit savings pot with Theresa May. I think there was only about 2p in it, which was disappointing, but probably realistic. But it makes sense, doesn't it, kind of playing into that, not just a rational side to savings, but actually creating some inertia, of positive friction in not just taking something out, right?
Absolutely. I think, there's not only a rational side to savings, but there's also an emotional side to it as well. The idea of being able to see your progress and see that you're making progress is something that that gives people a warm, fuzzy feeling, doesn't it? It makes everyone feel a little bit nice inside. So we can see from Bunq, there's the ability to kind of set these roundups. You can sort of see a transaction feed of all of the money that's come in and out of your pot, which is really nice. There's a progress bar telling you the percentage of how far you've gone through. There's auto saving and roundups, and then there's sort of the ability to set payment limits and things. So it's kind of like a really detailed way of saying, look, I want to see exactly what's in this pot and I want to control it. So that's kind of a really nice detailed savings pot. It gives us loads of control, and you can kind of see how sort of Bunq are looking at how they can help the user from an internal perspective. But there are sort of other ways that you can do it. One being the external model. So this is kind of, we're going to take a look here at Qapital, who's got the external services model. So Qapital are an American fintech, just to start off with. Here we can see, we can edit a goal. So they've got a goal in their accounts, this is what they call it. And here we can see a series of rules that they're allowing the users to set up. They've got a payday rule, they've got the roundup rule, guilty pleasure rule, and so on and so forth, all presented in this lovely, nice, clean UI. And then we've got the idea of being able to integrate these third parties into the service. Apple Health Rule here, for example, is we've got ourselves a reward for hitting fitness goals. And then we have this IFTTT set of rules, so these external services which we can link up to different third parties like Spotify and so on. So kind of wanted to focus there a little bit more on the idea of these external relationships. So being able to talk about kind of how it's working with IFTTT and how it's working with Apple. The idea of your external behaviors are moderating how much and how little you're able to spend is a really interesting model. It's sort of diving a little bit closer into that behavioral space of your app becoming the ecosystem of part of your wider life.
Yeah, and definitely, like you say, with things like recipes on the IFTT side, it's like being in a situation where you can create those and manage that in a different way. You don't have to go into your bank to add something to your savings now. You can have a recipe on the home screen of your mobile to enact those things. We've seen Monzo do that in the UK as well, haven't we? And I think there are a couple of other players globally that are kind of following this similar trend. It makes sense. It's taking savings from being kind of a completely integrated thing to distributing it to the point where you're thinking about it. Makes a lot of sense. I love the idea of the guilty pleasures side of things as well. It's like every time you see that transaction from Hummingbird Bakery or something type thing, then punish me by putting £5 in my savings account.
Exactly. And every time you go out for a big run, take £5 out of it and let's go buy yourself a beer or something. That's terrific.
I mean, in my case, that never happens, but
but it's really cool. So what this does really well is it sort of like, I guess it outsources some of the kind of ways of creating these savings rules to other parties. IFTTT, you've got the third party ecosystem of what they call applets to be able to do that, and it just allows it to get like creative. You can be really creative with the way that you're actually saving, and so there's kind of this wider network of creators available on that site. And it's sort of, allows you to start thinking more about like smart devices, how that's all going to factor into your sort of saving habits and things.
It would be wonderful to see almost like how third-party providers start to integrate with this type of capability. Because to your point, at the moment, it's very self-directed. It's me saying if I check in at the gym, then make sure I add some money. But actually, we've seen this in health insurance. People start to give better rates or better cashback if your behaviour is sensible.
For sure.
So actually, I guess we could see potentially people unlocking better savings rates for good behaviour, as it were.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's probably a future stage.
That's actually a little terrifying as well. What's going on in China, the idea of sort of your behaviour financially moderating some of your abilities to spend. That is a topic which we should definitely do some other point as well, though. Right. We've got that impulse, so if you guys want to check that out, it's brilliant.
Foreshadowing. So.
And then the final approach would be we're going to take a look at Plum. So Plum are operating somewhere along the lines of what we'd call the algorithm approach. So if we can take a look here, there's a feature on Plum called the Savings Brain. This allows you to kind of update your mood based on sort of how you're feeling at that current minute about spending. And really simply within the chat interface, we can select the option, loads of emojis, kind of really playful mood. And we can sort of quickly pause any auto savings and so on. We've got loads of control over how we want to kind of do this spending. So you can see here how it's working from that chat. And Plum is sort of, as we mentioned before, it's playing in the sort of like larger chunks of money space. This is the idea of being able to think what's going in and out of my account on a larger scale, rather than the odd pound and penny that some of these other fintechs are paying more attention to.
And typically, is that sort of an end of month type conversation? Because I guess people sort of save paycheck to paycheck, don't they?
For sure.
The things that's left over. I guess this type of interface would probably be more akin to that, wouldn't it? Like you say, rather than that every day 15p, it's
exactly
like 50 quid at the end of the month type.
Yeah, for sure. Plum actually called this savings brain feature the algorithm, which is kind of both terrifying and brilliant. But kind of what it does is it calculates to get the baseline savings that you can afford based on your income and so on. So it's kind of an ongoing discussion between the user and the product in a sense. It's really kind of it's a really useful tool for that. But they kind of figured out that they needed to take a little bit more time to think about how they give their users more control. And so they were thinking, okay, if we introduce this moods feature, what we can actually do is allow the user to think, okay, I'm feeling particularly adventurous this week. Let's maybe save a little bit less. I want to go out for a few beers. And they kind of split those into 5 categories. Shout out to Chris, actually, was speaking to him yesterday from Plum. He was walking us through this, which is great. So he was talking about chilled, shy, eager, ambitious, and then beast mode, which is, I guess, like 75% extra savings. It's absolutely horrifying. And it's kind of, Plum views itself really as kind of a type of pot. Like how in Monzo and so on, you're able to have lots of different pots. Plum sees itself as a pot. Yeah. So the idea there being that it's a really, really smart pot. They're working on a new feature called Splitter, which is kind of the ability to sort of invest those savings funds as well as actually create those savings.
Nice.
And starting to think a little bit more about how they can introduce a roundups feature. So there's sort of loads of really, really smart things going on in the algorithm role, and you can start to see how these two worlds of the smaller roundups and the bigger algorithmic savings can merge into one a little bit. It's you can start to think about that a little bit more here with the future.
Nice.
So the problems, as we mentioned, pots are kind of based on sort of smaller scale spending, and these algorithms are based on sort of larger scale income, big bills, that kind of stuff. So we're going to try to think about how you can sort of bridge that gap and bring those two services together is the biggest challenge from our perspective. From savings.
Well, I think it's really interesting because we're in a situation where we're moving. We talk at 11FS a lot about this, moving away from sort of commodity products to intelligent services. Yeah. And actually, I guess what we're seeing here is the commodity product here is just it's a thing that holds money, right? Yeah. You may or may not get interest on it, but you're definitely putting money away for a rainy day. Yeah. What's really nice to see, and I should say, is like actually when I was at Lloyds Banking Group back in like 2010. We introduced something called Save the Change. So essentially on transactions, it would round it up and it would move that amount to a savings account. Now, it wasn't marketed in the same way, in the way that it was a service, in the way that Monzo or Bunq or anybody is doing right now, and it didn't have that sort of purpose, that meaning behind it.
Yeah.
And I think this is kind of maybe a sort of a thematic view of actually what we're seeing in fintech generally is this is just good positioning for something that people should do. And actually it's the conditioning, the nudges to kind of push people in the direction of good behavior. Because everybody should be saving. Everybody should be sort of planning for the future or putting a little bit of money aside to make sure that you're not going to get yourselves into financial difficulties down the line. But actually it's nice to see that there's little nudges, little different ways of approaching this.
For sure, and kind of one of the ways that the fintechs have figured this out is that they don't have to rely on themselves for this. Like we talked last week about the integration of these regtechs and things. Again, we can see third parties kind of jumping in to help out in this space. It's all adding towards that sort of hub and spoke model that you'll always hear Tom at Monzo talking about. It's the idea of introducing these third parties into the Monzo ecosystem. So now you've got the kind of Oak North savings integration. They're also testing out Barclaycard in labs, and it's interesting to see that that's not shown on your main page. It's shown as a pot. They're actually showing Barclaycard as a pot. So
that's interesting because then credit and positive balances, negative balances are just pots essentially.
Exactly.
Cool.
Yeah. So there's loads of really kind of creative ways of displaying this information and keeping it sort of tied into the product in kind of more unique ways than what we've seen before. So I guess that's the three approaches that we've talked about here. Just to kind of run through them again, is there is an internal way of looking at savings pots, being able to control everything to the nth degree, like with like Bunq. There is sort of the inclusion of third parties and external services, things like IFTTT, being able to leverage these smart people to help you with little sort of applets with information from your Apple Watch or whatever. And then there's the sort of algorithmic approach, being able to rely upon the algorithm that these really smart Plum people have spent years building. It's all meant to help, and it's all sort of working towards this greater goal of helping you to set a little bit of money aside for the future and things like that. So there's lots of really interesting stuff, and seeing the way that these three things will come together in the future, that's where kind of I think we see the model going in the future.
Nice. Well, and hopefully people save a little bit more money. I'm definitely going to go and check out Plum's Beast Mode. That sounds pretty cool, if nothing else. All right, guys, that's probably all the time that we have for today, but thanks very much for joining us. Next week, what are we going to be talking about, Jim?
Next week, we're going to take a look at card management, specifically from Revolut, who are sort of the kings of card management, able to create and use loads of different cards.
Very good. If you want to send us any feedback, if you want to give us any prompts, or if you want to just give us a shout out, then hit us on pulse@11fs.com. Thanks very much for tuning in today. We'll catch you next week. Bye-bye. Done. Nice.
I feel like one of those